Well, thanks very much, everybody. And congratulations to William Dogood and his team. Really, please, a round of applause, everyone. As many of you will know here, because you're doing it too, it takes a lot of emotional energy to do this. To keep planning, to keep believing, to keep creating, to keep organising, and to do it all on a day when Scotland is going to whack the opposition and clinch the title, right? Let's just think that way. It's funny how things occur to you just at the very last minute. God, what is it with having tall people on stage, eh? I just looked at that for the first time, the art of statehood. And actually, in a way, that's what all of these films and everything's about. Because, you know, there is a business to being a state, which all the small countries to the east of us have demonstrated, all the Nordic countries. It doesn't end with independence. It doesn't start with independence. It's a constant thing that we could be doing now, very much of it. So that's part of what today is about. Now, I realise that not having a monitor in front of me means I will keep keeking over my shoulder to be guided by what the heck I thought was a good idea to say 6 months ago. But anyway, this is the kind of key question, I suppose, whether Scotland fits into that Nordic profile. And maybe's aye, maybe's no. I mean, the beauty of Scotland is that we stand in the crossroads of many cultures. And whilst people may end up arguing about that, are we Nordic, are we Celtic, are we British? I mean, we're all of that. And actually, as Alan McRae said, he was the leader of the Ascent Crofters, the hybrid is the strongest plant. So let's not worry too much about all these different things, but let's celebrate them. And because my lot come from Caithness originally, despite the kind of Belfast accent, bit of a weird detour there. Not as weird as being born in Wolverhampton, I'll tell you. But anyway, that Nordic component is a strong part of our culture. But the thing that's kind of different, really, is that there's some really key ways the Nordics organise, and we don't. All the passions there, the outlook, the love of equality. Look around this building. It keeps in every different kind of way. It celebrates these things. Our governance structures don't. So what we're doing is we're doing heavy lifting without that support. And that's the difference I think we could be making. Now, you're not going to see this very well, I guess. But if you want, you don't almost need to know all of this. And I've got, you know it already. Look, the happiest country is Finland. Now, is anybody Finnish in the room? Half Finnish? The Finns are not a cheery lot, you've got to say. I mean, they'd be the first to say to you, they're not laughing out loud. They're satisfied, and they have the highest levels of trust in the world. Now, trust matters. They also, those countries that are shown there in yellow, the strong yellow, those are the top 10 countries for income equality. And you'll see Finland's there, and we're not. So that makes a massive difference to everything you try to do, obviously. This question of trust, if you've seen the Finland film, if you haven't, there's wee leaflets on that table at the back that just gives you the website. There's still about another 10, 12 events to go. But the Finns have got some of the highest levels of trust in the world. And that makes all sorts of things possible. So, for example, education. You may know they have the best education system pretty much, results-wise. How do they do it? Generally speaking, it's because schools run themselves. There's nobody looking over people's shoulders. There's no 10 hours a week filling in paperwork. There's no having to prove yourself to professionals who aren't in the room. All these aspects of the way we work in Scotland are wrong, wrong, wrong. They radiate a lack of trust. They radiate that professionals basically don't trust the average Joe and Josephine at all. And actually, that infects you with doubt when you realize how little you're being trusted to do stuff. And that's just one aspect of this. But that trust is born by putting power right to the lowest level in our society, and we are not doing it. Of course, the other thing about the Nordics is that they're also bloody healthy. So, you know when you're looking at a profile of those guys, just, it's not us, is it? And yet, they didn't get there, the genes have helped a bit, but they've got there by planning and very, very long-term stuff. And the reason they've got long-term planning, it's proportional governments. So let me give you an example. Denmark, in fact, it's a pretty topical one given the oil crisis we're in today. But in the last oil crisis, and I think a lot of us are old enough to remember it, the 1970s, we're the generation that keeps shutting the doors and switching the lights off. It marked us. Anyway, the 1970s, Denmark realized, like many countries, that it didn't have enough energy of its own. And it decided it would never be stuck depending on anyone else again. And that's the moment when all the parties in that parliament decided they would switch to renewables, way ahead of everyone else. They would keep the price of petrol high, oil high. They would make the importation of cars almost impossibly high. And they've never gone back on that. Now, that's the reason they switched to wind. That's the reason Vestas, a Danish company, produce a third of the turbines in the world. That should have been us. Because we have a far, far better take from wind than Denmark, absolutely. But they had the political collateral, if you like, to decide to move ahead with it. And that was 1974. As many of you will also know, that was a long time ago now. There have been 30 changes of government. There has been no change of policy. Why? Because that coalition or that joint way of working means that when there's a change in the constellation of parties in government, they don't welsh on the deals they've made. That's how you do long term. And that's how you don't do long term here, especially Westminster, which is just a blimmin' boomerang or a pendulum, because first past the post is ridiculous. But you need to know why you want change, and this is why you want change. You want long-term planning to change things. You're maybe not seeing that. By contrast, the Scots feel like we're just kind of constantly blown along, heavy, high winds, trampolines, dugs, doing the beach. And it feels like we're just not as glamorous somehow as these kind of Nordic folk. And actually, there was a stage when, you'll remember maybe, that Alex Salmond talked about the Ark of Prosperity. Anyone remember that? And I can remember going in and speaking to Alex about that. He was coined it in 2007. Of course, in 2008, Iceland and Ireland conveniently went almost bankrupt, which made the Ark of Prosperity look a little bit soggy. And Jim Murphy, do you remember him? Jim Murphy started talking about the Ark of Insolvency, cheeky monkey. But the point was, I went in to speak to Alec about it, and I was trying to say to him, from my little understanding of it then, and more now, these countries, this is not an Ark of Prosperity, it's an Ark of Resilience. And resilience is more important. Because prosperity can come and go, but resilience will let you spring back from just about anything. And that's what we should be aiming at. Not the blind pursuit of prosperity in itself. Fine, somebody else can do that. But actually building the kind of resilience that a society needs. If you look at Finland, for example, unbelievable that they could spring back from a civil war like they had. Unbelievable that they could actually spring back from a Second World War where they ended up having to pay reparations to Russia, and out of that became the shipbuilding kings they are today, because they had to build fast, because 500 vessels had to be given to the Russians. Weird, eh? That such an adversity created such a capacity. So it's resilience we should be aiming for, and I did say that to Alec, and he didn't agree, let's just say. So I think the feeling for a lot of people when I find I'm talking about the Nordic countries, there's a bit of a plea, and I've got to say, it was slightly made today, is can we not just aim a bit lower, please? No. No. Because this is where we should be aiming. Now, it's going to take us a bit of time, but I have a couple of thoughts about this. As somebody who, back in the day, used to tan up enough Monroes, you need to get the sense that you're seeing the summit. Even if it's a false summit, you still need to get yourself orientated towards the top. We should be facing the direction we mean to travel in. We also need to believe and understand that we're not crap. We're not personally crap. Now, this might sound weird, coming from that Caithness family and having been involved with many buyouts and so on. I've seen people who won't say it openly, but deeply believe they are crap. That this is the reason things don't progress. That this is why they're stuck. Even that this is why they can't aspire to Nordic sort of standards, because somewhere in the Scottish psyche or whatever it is, we simply cannot hope to make 2 and 2 equals 4. You can't hope that with the level of resources we've got, we could end up with a society that would match their outcomes. Hey folks, 2 and 2 does equal 4 everywhere, right? And there is no reason not to think that the kind of objectives that a country has, which controls its energy in particular, that those should not be ours. The energy revolutions and the democratic independence revolutions have always gone hand in hand. And that's why today's tilt towards energy is so important. Let's look at Iceland. There's this question of local control and this question of energy. I've kind of been making wee films for a while because this is so interesting. Who's been to Iceland? Okay, who's alive in the room, for crying in a bucket? Come on. Right, who's been to Iceland? Is that it? What are you doing, the rest of you? You said go north instead of going south for your holidays once. Well, these guys are pretty inspiring, because if you've gone to Iceland, especially if you've gone in the winter, you will experience being warmer than you've ever been in your life, indoors, right? Because these guys have got geothermal heating, and it means that they've got some of the cheapest energy in Northern Europe, despite being subarctic. It's quite a stunner when you actually turn up and realize you're having to open windows in January just to be able to sleep. But that is the size of it, because their energy is so cheap. Now, when you look at geothermal energy, how did they actually do that? Well, the answer is, for the main part, this power station, Hellisheidar, was invested in by 5 local councils in Iceland. And that was just before the point where they became bankrupt. So let me just hit you with this, right? Iceland, population 355,000, invested in its own geothermal energy, producing heating bills of £20 a month in winter for a small flat. Nobody else invested in that. It was them. So it's just to try and get a measure of what we should be able to expect. Come on. Finland, land reform. Oh, if only I had another hour. But anyway, people might think we've missed the boat. It's ancient history, really. It makes no difference. And this is so wrong. Finland's success as a country is very largely based on land reform, which happened in 1918, actually after their civil war. And what it meant was that tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Finns got to own pockets of land. Who's been to Finland? Gosh, that is strange, actually. There's usually far more people who have been to Iceland, but anyway. Finland is an enormous forest. If you own land, you own forest. And so what happened in the last century, the Finns produced pretty much all the wood pulp to supply the burgeoning European newspaper industry. So practically, and then the last event I was at, somebody shouted, and toilet paper. Aye, and toilet paper as well. So anything papery, basically, the Finns produced it. The point was, when that industry took off, it wasn't just the Duke of Buccleuch who benefited with a few bob for his factor. It was all the boats that rose together, all the people who owned land, and that was all the Finns. And how did they do it, just by the by? They organized in massive cooperatives. So Metsalito Cooperative, for example, 500,000 members. And think about that, because you might think, geez, how do we manage to get cooperatives organized enough to be able to do anything? These guys supplied the entire European newspaper industry for all that length of time, for a century, with 500,000 members and more. So that's how this can work, and that's why it matters. That was the revolution for Finland, because that wealth percolated across the country evenly, and that equality of income because of the land made such a difference to the country. It also is hyper-local. I hope this here would be showing which are the most locally democratic countries in Europe. Now you'll see that Finland is a deep blue and we are kind of red. And this is because that's telling you where the power is. The key thing of all the Nordic countries is power is local. So Finland, for example, has 310 local councils, plus 20 or 30 regionals. So it's got about 340 councils. We've got 32. Now I go back to my earlier point. What does that say to us? It says we couldn't organise a piss up in a brewery. That is what the professionals, the politicians and the parties think of us. And that is so wrong. I mean, what I've discovered is when you look at the countries that went for independence, all of them, Norway, Finland, Iceland, they all did actually have referendums, but they all had 92 to 98% support. And the reason, I think, was they were already independent up here, and they were practicing independence every week by running everything themselves at local level. They were modeling activity, they were modeling decision making, they were modeling independence. And I'm afraid what's happening here is that we're modeling the opposite. Have we got a heckler already? Can we, sir, can you take a wee seat there, eh? We're modeling passivity. I mean, how many people here are a councillor? Not a community councillor, a councillor. Right. Shocking. Just take that in. How many people here run a cooperative? Actually, I'm enjoying this. How many people have got a boat? Look at us. We've got 2 people with a boat, and we've got a coastline which, if it was laid around the earth, would go a third of the way around the planet. There's so much wrong with this, folks, and we must be tackling that now, because otherwise we keep talking, we don't do. We need to do, because you get confidence through doing. The people that persuaded me of that were Egg. I was a trustee of the Isle of Egg buyout, and those people changed completely from having no confidence in themselves to actually using just their own good ideas to put that island really back on its feet, and doing has changed them completely. We need to do. More about local ideas. There'll be a lot about tax. In Sweden, everybody here, pretty much I'd guess, who is a kind of average taxpayer, would pay their entire tax to their local council. In Sweden, Stockholm, the central government is funded by corporation tax and higher rate taxpayers only. Everybody else just pays their income tax to their council. And you might think, gosh, that's a bit weird. I said that once when I was in Sweden. And they said, really? How do you do it? And I thought, oh dear. Yeah, we pay everything centrally to Westminster, who pays something back to Holyrood, and then Holyrood pays something back to councils, with all those administrative fees and everything taken off. And actually, your services are delivered locally. So if we want to get rid of the British mindset, to me it could only be typified strongly by being absolutely top-down, absolutely elitist, and absolutely convinced that if the little people had their hands on the money, they'd make a right hips of it. So it's worth thinking about. The Swedes do pretty well. They also have 92 local energy companies, which are mostly the councils. So all of that muscle is happening there. And just by the by, Swedish local elections have a turnout of 92%. I wonder why. Do you think it's because they've got your money? Do you think that's another reason that council turnouts are pretty low here? You could change that. We've got to change that. And there's all the local energy companies there. Well, it's not all of them because there's so many of them, but they are those councils, which makes a big difference. And just to bang the drum, since there's so many here that share this particular preoccupation, they do district heating. Now, why the hell we are not doing that now beats me. If you don't know what that is, and my God, what a situation. The whole of Northern Europe is basically functioning because of district heating. That is one boiler or power system, many pipes of hot water. That is what's made these Nordic countries, a third of whose territory sits in the Arctic, that's what's made them habitable. It's the reason no old people die of hypothermia. They do here. And it's efficient. If you want to change your system to something more green, there's one change. How many changes in this room to reach you? You're all going to have to pay more for individual systems. This is a curse of Thatcherism, the belief that heating, something as prime as that, should be left to an individual when the whole of Northern Europe delivers it as a collective good. Now, how much of a spring in your step do you think you would have if every town in Scotland had one street at least to start off with, converted to district heating with a great big slogan, collective heating brought to you by the Scottish government? And actually, the Scottish government has 100% control of heating, not energy, but heating. So come on. Norway. Well, there's another big important point about land, because actually that very democratic parliament arose from a constitution which gave the vote to every man, because it was those kind of days, who owned land in 1814. And so many men owned land in Norway, because that's normal. We're not. They're normal. That 42% of guys got the vote overnight in 1814. That transformed their society because their parliament was always ultra-democratic. The same line applied in the Reform Act of 1832 in Britain, which gave the vote to all men over 25 who owned land, and 5% got the vote. And in Scotland, 2.8%. 42%, 3%. That's the difference that happened because the ability to vote was always related to the ownership of land. So that's the head start the Norwegians have had on us. And because of that really grounded democracy, they've been able to do a lot of things we haven't, particularly advanced hydro energy. That hydropower, everybody ogles the oil fund, but the Norwegians don't use their oil. It's a hydroelectric country. It's hydro that revolutionized them. And once again, hydropower is owned by local councils. It's not owned by the state. They export oil, and right now, with the oil crisis we've got again, they're laughing because they're exporting oil to suckers like us who didn't get going on the resorts we've got. And that was because we couldn't. So, that all lies ahead of us. But if we're not going to think we're aiming for something like this, I don't know why we would think we want to be independent. We've got to. This is the kind of change we need to have. Denmark. Cooperation. Everybody says, yeah, it's good to be cooperative. And actually, the Scots have got a bit of a, I would say a bit of a natural tilt that way. In fact, since we're standing in Alistair Gray's building, he wrote a fantastic book, Why the Scots Should Rule Scotland, in 1997. It's a tiny wee thin thing, actually. And his main thinking was that the Scots have had to become cooperative because our land is crap. Particularly in Highland areas, we had to work together. His thesis then is that many parts of England where the land is not crap basically became very defensive because they had a different experience. And that's the book. It's a really interesting one. But this question of cooperation, it doesn't just come out of the ether, you build it. So the amazing thing that the Danes do is they have a system at the age of 15 where 15-year-olds, most of them, get to go away from school, from home for a year. They study with other 15-year-olds, they live with them, they cook with them, they take care of one another. and they study something extra that they really love. So the one that's in the Denmark film is on an island called Samso, and it's a diving school. Can you imagine being sent away from home at the age of 15 to spend a year learning to dive and everything else as well? Everyone we interviewed in that film said it's the single most important thing about Denmark, because the kids come back as responsible adults pretty much, but they've had fun. And so everything about cooperation is encouraging people. You have to get the structures in that encourage people to feel cooperative and grounded. There's an awful lot in Scotland where we were telt. We were all telt. And so we assume that that kind of directive will just tell you what to do and you'll do it. Nah. Smart countries, the Finns as well, they encourage. And they also, just by the by, make sure kids don't go to school till they're 6 and 7. The only reason we're doing 4 and 5 is because we had the first factory acts in the world, practically. We put women into factories and we needed somewhere to put the kids. That's why 4 and 5 are particular to Britain. 82% of the countries in the world send kids to school at 6 and 7. That's the right age. We can be moving towards that too, although we need the funding of independence to make it work properly. But again, it's a reason to want independence because we need to make that change. These guys come back pretty transformed, and you can see it in the society because the levels of what they can do together and how easily they cooperate go all the way through to that government I spoke about earlier. Finally, I think probably, Estonia. And this is a question again about building trust, because this trust is so important. That is the Baltic chain from 1989, when there was millions of people stood side by side to express a desire for independence around the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And because of the trust levels that there are in all the Nordic countries, including the Estonians, who are all pretty much sort of semi-Nordic, semi-Slavic, but they have an ID card. Now, I can see a lot of, people will go, I don't think so. And in Britain, we're very much, I don't think so. And Labour has just had to withdraw its idea of an ID card because we don't trust them. And this is what happens in a country without trust. You can't modernise. And I've got to say, having watched what they do in Estonia, it's mind-blowing. You don't need other cards apart from that card. They have systems that absolutely protect your identity and your data. And for example, any of you have spent time filling in your self-assessment for your tax? Anybody do that in the room? Yep. Right, it takes 1 minute. Because the data's already there. Who's applied for stuff here on the state where you've had to pile in the information they've already got? Well, you don't. It takes a minute. And they've already figured that just one digital application, which is being able to sign documents online, has saved them 2% of their GDP. If you don't want to do that, rock on. But what you need to be able to have a country that makes that kind of change is trust. And the Estonians have that because they walked the difficult path to independence as recently in 1991 together. They made very bold decisions about going digital because they had nothing else going for them. One of their returning exiles came from the States and suggested that the internet was a thing to look at. Now, because all their leaders, since the communist era had been swept away, their leaders were all under 30. Their bankers were teenagers, seriously. And given the youth of that cabinet, they were able to embrace something that I'm afraid to say our age group might not have done. They took a risk. They bought state-of-the-art computers with the little money they had, and they put them in primary schools, not executive offices, not head bummers. And so they grew the first generation of digital entrepreneurs. So Skype, may it rest in peace, Skype was actually the product of 3 Estonian engineers who as children were the first to get computers after Estonian independence. it's worth thinking about all these things. We need to be open to what's running when we become independent and not stick rigidly to what's been. And that is this question of trust. When you look there, you can see the countries that trust most, then again, are blue. And there's the Finns in dark blue. They're right at the top of the heap. And there's us, yellow, not doing very well at all. And that's something we need to build. So the thing about it is, it'll be hard for you to see that. So much of Scotland is going the right way. You know, we've put the energy in when it comes to land buyouts, and that's been a really brave thing for people to do, actually, because it's done without much support. We have incredible numbers of development trusts that run assets around Scotland, and they're demonstrating to themselves and their communities that they can do that. There's hardly been a problem with one where there are problems with private companies. But the big thing I think that we need to think about is what community means. Here, it means volunteers. It very often means burnt-out volunteers who are struggling on, trying not to say they're burnt out because they don't want to let the side down. Everywhere else, a community means a municipality with structure, with voting, with power right down at that lowest level. Particularly Norway, look at that. That's the number of councils they have. In fact, they've got a few more now, 357, so that every community has got that practice of running itself. And we don't. Now, we do have the development trust movement, and it's amazing. I can't get all the names of development trusts. I mean, that's just A to, D. There's huge numbers of people. And I do wonder for the politicians what it takes to watch all these development trusts set up where there's not a paid director in it. And they all willingly take up that, learn things no one expected to learn, take responsibility no one should be expected to do. And look, that's just A to D of it. And yet we still wonder whether we're capable and we won't make these structural changes. And then the final points, okay, this is the round ball. But that moment in the Euros with the umbrella man, or the brolly man as he was known, it's a lovely demonstration of something that is really unique about Scotland and in which the Nordics don't hold a candle to us, actually. And that is just that willingness to reach out to people. I mean, that's the guy who just was wandering around in the rain, put his brolly up over the wee shell-pit manny that was shuffling along with his Zimmer, and that became an absolute icon of those tournaments. It was taken up and put on an advert on all the German underground because those guys were so impressed with just that spontaneous gesture of generosity. It happened in Kenmure Street, which was a really powerful moment for Scotland, where neighbours decided they weren't letting two guys get lifted by the Home Office because they were neighbours. And the guy who dived beneath the van man, what a guy. If we had a Scottish honours system, he should be given one. In fact, why haven't we got a Scottish honours system? Do it. But that film, see it when it comes out. Everybody to Kenmure Street. It's a great gesture again of reaching out. But Jock Tamson's bairns, and in the referendum, the independence referendum, the criteria was if you were living here for 3 months, you're in. The criteria for Brexit was ethnic. It was Commonwealth, Irish, British citizens. You could have lived here your entire life from another country, you didn't get a say. So we should be proud of that because we did that without even thinking about it. We embraced, if you like, the newcomer. That's a strong, strong thing that other countries don't do. And of course, we're not doing too badly with music, are we? In cultural terms, we are so strong. And I just wanted to finish on this, which this is just it looks like an average bookcase. It's actually a bookcase of a woman who asked me to go and speak in Iceland. And when I was using her office, again with the window open because it was so hot, I looked at her bookcase and it was full of Scottish literature. And when I said to her, wow, you've got a hell of a bookcase there, she said, yeah, I did my degree in Glasgow in Scottish literature. I said, really? Okay. And I said, why did you do that? She said, why wouldn't I? You've got one of the best literatures in the world. And that's on the back of her door. So let's do it. Thank you.